Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the comprehensive, yet informal study of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, the guide on how to use reason and transcend or not transcend its limits. I guess it's up to you, but it'll show us what the limits are according to Kant anyway later. On the road to getting there, though, we have to go through. Well, we've been through the transcendental aesthetic, and now we're in the transcendental logic, where we've already established the difference between general logic and transcendental logic, and now we're getting more into transcendental logic with the categories, which we've seen tables of, which was cool. There were two of them. And now we're getting into the deduction of those categories, which we were introduced to in the last session. And there is an additional introductory thing here, which is a few pages, which we'll be covering this session. And then tomorrow, we're actually going to be getting to the deduction. So, yeah, lots of prep work here, but we're getting through it, and I think it all should be helpful, even if some of it is just a tad repetitive. So this section, like I just said, it's a transition to the transcendental categories, or transcendental deduction of the categories. So we'll probably have some more introductory material, but should serve us well on our quest to complete the transcendental logic and eventually the rest of the book. So that's my little introduction. Do you have anything to say before we begin, Patrick?
Yeah, just in case you're confused, we talked about an A and a B section. That's what we're doing next section because Matt forgot that this part existed.
Good. Yes, I should have said that. Yes, there was some talk about that. Although we have decided for sure, even though it was likely the case, but we have confirmed tonight that the next
We're
session, which
doing
we'll be at least recording tomorrow, we will be using the B section because it's divided more clearly. It just seems to make more sense, flows better, all of those things in terms of understandability, comprehensibility, readability. All that's better in the B section, at least to us, and for
well,
this
for me,
study.
it's also the reasoning that if Kant decided to revise something, he probably did it for a reason. So I would trust his reasoning. It's the intent, right? It's authorial intent here.
Yeah, that's another good thing. Generally, although
Two
some of the
different
things Kant
reasons for
here, what?
yeah, two different reasons for the same conclusion.
Yeah, sure. So, but that's gonna be happening next time because there is no difference in this section. We're gonna be going over in this session the transition to the transcendental deduction of the categories. That is still the same regardless of the A or B. Um, the only thing here is that there's a footnote. It says no section number appears here in the second edition, but it should be called section 14 logically because uh, uh, this is between sections 13 and 15. And because it's not numbered, honestly, I think that might have been the reason why I forgot it. I just went to the next numbered section. So I fell for this meme. Good thing uh, there's a little translator's footnote here that helps us figure that out. And I saw that when I was getting ready, prepping for the study. So I picked that up and I was like, oh shoot, let's just do this one today. And hopefully Harrison will be here to join us when we do the next session tomorrow. So we'll have him for the bigger, like, actual deduction. But Patrick and I are just going to cover some transition here today, transition material, if you would like to, if 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 you want to call it that. So yeah, do you have any other things I may
I
have
think that's
forgetting?
enough transitioning to the transition.
So true. Okay, in that case, let's fully transition to the transition. Do you want to start reading?
Sure.
Cool.
There are only two possible cases in which synthetic representations. eh, Okay. There are only two possible cases in which synthetic representation and its objects can come together, necessarily relate to each other, and, as it were, meet each other. Either if the object alone makes the representation possible, or if the representation alone makes the object possible. If it is the first, then this relation is only empirical, and the representation is never possible a priori. And this is the case with appearance in respect of that in which it belongs to sensation. But if it is the second, then since representation in itself, for we are not here talking about its causality by means of the will, does not produce its object as far as its existence is concerned, the representation is still determinant of the object a priori, if it is possible through it alone to cognize something as an object. But there are two possible conditions under which alone cognition of an object is possible. First, intuition, through which it is given, but only as appearance. Second, concept, through which an object is thought that corresponds to this intuition. Through okay, it is clear from what has been said above, however, that the first condition, namely that under which alone objects can be intuitive, in fact does lie in the mind a priori as the ground of the form of objects. All appearances therefore necessarily agree with this formal condition of sensibility, because only through it can they appear, i.e., be empirically intuited and given. The question now is whether a priori concepts do not also proceed as conditions under which alone something can be, if not intuited, nevertheless thought as objects in general. For then all empirical cognition of objects is necessarily in accord with such concepts, since without their presupposition nothing is possible as an object of experience. Now, however, all experience contains, in addition to the intuition of the senses through which something is given, a concept of an object that is given an intuition, or appears. Hence, concepts of objects in general lie at the ground of all experiential cognition as a priori conditions. Consequently, the objective validity of the categories as a priori concepts rests on the fact that through them alone is experience possible, as far as the form of thinking is concerned. For then they are then related necessarily and a priori to objects of experience, since only by means of them can objects of experience be thought at all. God,
Okay.
that was so poorly written,
Yeah,
and it was just completely redundant.
it was, and I'm not sure if like there's anything super new here
Nothing
at
new.
all. This just seems like the
It's a review.
without intuitions and without
So
concepts,
it's
things
a
are
review.
empty and blind and all of that.
Yeah, it's just a review, but let's recap this. Basically,
Hmm.
we've already introduced that thought is composed or representation is composed of intuitions and concepts, and these can be a priori or empirical. And we're not talking about the empirical ones, we're talking about the a priori ones. If they're a priori, right, a priori intuitions are necessary grounds for experience,
Hmm.
i.e., we need space and time in order to have, anything appear before us. It needs to appear in a space and it needs to appear in a time. So the a priori intuitions are the form of experience. Well, Kant also says, secondly, well, what we're looking for now are the a priori concepts that should be um, likewise the ground of any possible experience,
Hmm.
which he's already said all of this.
Yeah.
So I guess let's move on.
Yep. Um, there was something I thought in the beginning here that he makes a difference between. Let's see
um,
if it is.
Yes, either the object alone makes the representation possible, or if the representation alone makes the object possible. So
Yeah.
the idea here being that a representation is empirical. One of the marks of an empirical representation is that the object alone makes the representation possible.
Yes.
So, for instance, we could not a priori have a representation of redness that has to be
Mm-hmm.
given to us through the capacity through sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the other kind is the representation alone makes the object possible. So the representation alone making the object possible would be anything we need a priori for the grounds of experience, i.e., space. Without the a priori intuition of space, no objects would be possible. So this is, A little bit. It's a necessary correlate of what we've talked about already. It's not strictly repetitive, so it's nice that he brings that out.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Otherwise, I
touch
would
on
say
that.
that that's just pretty much repetition.
Yeah, everything after is pretty redundant, but it's nice to have it all strung together. And honestly, if I had to like pick a like section to introduce like Kant to someone, I would. This is like a good one. Like I've been thinking about that because like other people have been interested in like joining the study potentially, and I'm like, what's like a good way I can like get them up to speed with like a large amount of like this is a page I might like save in my head for that. And
That's
if
true.
anyone
He
else is
does
interested in
sort of.
such a task, consider I recommend this page. This is a great page to explain large amounts of Kant in very compact
That's
time
true.
and
It's not
space.
super well written, but it
No,
does
no,
remind
no.
you.
But
But it
it
does remind you of everything that you need to go through because it does cover pretty much everything that he's talked about so far.
yeah, so just make sure you understand this and are able to break it down, and that person will have a pretty solid comprehension of lots of Kant. Yeah, so great. Thank you, Kant, for lots of reminders and repackagings of your previous claims. Cool. All right. I guess I will pick it up. The transcendental deduction of all a priori concepts, therefore, has a principle toward which the entire investigation must be directed, namely this: that they must be recognized as a priori conditions of the possibility of experiences, whether of the intuition that is encountered in them or of the one thinking. Concepts that supply the objective ground of the possibility of experience are necessary just for that reason. The unfolding of the experience in which they are encountered, however, is not their deduction but their illustration, since they would thereby only be contingent. Without this original relation to possible experience, in which all objects of cognition are found, their relation to any object cannot be comprehended at all. Okay,
Again, a lot of review.
yeah, that's really similar to what he was saying.
However, I have one problem.
Yeah,
He
what's
says concepts that supply the objective ground of the possibility of experience.
mm,
What's objective about it? In what way is it the objective ground of the possibility of experience rather than the subjective ground of the possibility of experience?
right? This is a problem that we he highlighted last session, was it? I think where we were talking about like it was either the last one or the one before it, where we were talking about like subjective concepts and like the big concern, right? The big like purpose of this investigation into their deduction is to prove that they're objective and not merely subjective, like someone maybe like Hume would say. And I don't think he really like tackles that here, but I think he's like slipping in his like conclusion as
But what do we mean by objective or subjective, right? Because if we're talking about phenomenon, aren't phenomenon subjective experiences? Or is he just using objective in a different way here?
I think he means it in the sense of like the problem, like for example, like the problem of cause and effect. It's like how does the subjective uh, um, concept, like conceptual framework of causality, apply to like objects, or is it merely a subjective?
Okay, I think that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
yeah,
think he means it in that sense.
yeah, I think that makes sense.
But he, you are, well, I don't know if this is what you meant to do, but I would say it's correct in pointing out that it's a bit. He kind of jumps to the conclusion that he's like concepts that supply the objective ground of the possibility of experience. Well, that's like kind of like the question we're asking, right? Like, do they? Oh, well, he makes a claim here are necessary for just that reason. So what's that reason? Um,
Well,
oh,
it's
that they're the
necessary for
next.
us to find them, which he's saying that our point is to find the objective grounds, like that concepts, like that cause and effect, for instance, does apply objectively. That's part of his goal. Like he
Yes.
says explicitly. So he's saying that it's necessary, not in the sense of like, oh, necessary contingent truth, but
Mm.
like it's necessary for us to find them.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. Toward which the
It's
yeah
necessary to his project.
investigation must be directed. Yep. Okay. Cool. Um, yeah, which we also covered, right? We was saying we had a bit on why it was uh, necessary for such a thing to take place versus just like chilling with the table that he gave us, basically. And
Just a review, um, because I feel like this is a little bit like esoteric,
yeah,
the way philosophers are using necessary,
Yeah.
right? Kant is using necessary, I think, here in actually the more ordinary language sense of the word. Like, oh, it's necessary for me to do this, it's necessary for me to do
Mm-hmm.
that. If I want to boil water, it's necessary for me to have heat. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to logical necessity,
Yeah, which is
which
like,
is probably what I think you were thinking of here.
oh, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, so logical necessity being like 2 plus 2 necessarily equals 4. It could not have been otherwise that 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4. I mean, obviously that's controversial because everything's controversial, but it's one of the better examples we can
Yeah.
give.
Uh, yeah, you're not wrong. Yes. Okay. So that's a yeah. I think that's a good breakdown of that. I don't think there's much else. That's a pretty like. There's not much substance to this. He's kind of just like laying out a thing that has been both of these sections, like the first half and the second half, both have been explored previously. So I think we kind of
Yeah.
related it to those as well as we could. So
And
hopefully,
then it seems like there's like a massive section that's all in parentheses.
yeah,
Like,
well, a bracket or something, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and
Well,
this
it's a
this
bracket,
actually
it's not
seems
parentheses,
this
it's
actually
parentheses.
seems to have like a good amount of meat, philosophical meat to it. So, do you wanna read that one?
Sure, why not? There are, however, three original sources, capacities or faculties of the soul, which contain the conditions of the possibility of experience, and cannot themselves be derived from any other faculty of the mind, namely sense, imagination, and apperception. On these are grounded 1. The synopsis of the manifold a priori through sense, 2. The synthesis of this manifold through the imagination, finally 3. The unity of this synthesis through original apperception. In addition to their empirical use, all of these faculties have a transcendental one, which is concerned solely with form which is possible a priori. We have discussed this with regard to the senses in the first part above. However, we will now attempt to understand the nature of the two other ones. Well,
Okay.
I'm glad because I still do not understand like imagination in Kant.
Yeah, yeah. The second step. This is a throwback to a few sessions ago. Well, maybe more than a few now, but yeah, that second step towards the unity of the apperception.
So basically, he's saying there are three steps that we have to go through to have an experience. First, we have to sense a synopsis of the manifold. We have to gather all of the things around us and put them together in sense. And then he says basically we have to put them together again through imagination, and then again through apperception.
So
I'm
yeah,
not
this
clear on what
imaginative step is not
the
really something that's well defined, at least at this point. Maybe
yeah, it's not
maybe
clear
with
to
his
me what.
weird organization, it'll come later on. Like maybe how lots of like the
Yeah.
transcendental aesthetic would make more sense if you read like some of the like logic for I don't know. So maybe we'll get to a point where he'll be like, oh yes, this is like a small treatise on the imagination, and we'll be like, oh okay.
I
But
mean, to me, it's pretty clear, right?
mm,
Sense, right? You take in information, and
mm-hmm,
then our perception, right? You know that this information is one
unified.
unified experience because you're like, okay, I know that I'm having this experience,
Yep.
so it's one experience. What's that middle step? What does it do?
Yeah, I don't
What's-
know. I can only throw my hands up and like hope that we will get some sort of explanation. Again, maybe not even of like one that's like generally satisfactory, but at least we can be like, oh, okay, Kant was having a funny Kant moment, but at least we can like understand that. Like, right, we don't even have that much. We just have like, oh, insert second step. It,
The other thing is, I don't think Kant has really talked about apperception yet. I think we
No,
have
we have.
because
So this makes
God,
sense to us too. And if this doesn't make sense to you, don't. I mean, basically just think of like a unification process. Generally, I think that's really all you need to know for now. We'll get more to like perception later. I don't want to like, because I feel like if we went into it now, it would like get confusing.
Well,
Um,
I think our perception is pretty simple, actually. It's self-awareness. But it's that idea that having an awareness of yourself in some way, that self-consciousness, is what enables you to recognize that your experience is one experience, rather than like just an indefinite jumble.
yeah, it's the unity of sense through basically self awareness. Like
So,
self-awareness is the method through which you recognize unity.
right.
Um, yeah. So that's okay. Yeah, you're right. That is good to know. I'm thinking of like the transcendental unity of synthetic, later on we'll get to a little bit more complicated
Yeah.
process, but basically just self-awareness. We're self-aware, so we recognize
Well, the
unity in our
transcendental
experience.
unity of synthetic apperception is pretty simple. One, it's transcendental because it's a necessary ground for experience, right?
Yeah.
As we covered, we already explained that. And B, it's synthetic because it's putting together the diverse aspects of intuition
Mm-hmm.
under a common experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's a transcendental unity of synthetic apperception rather than just, apperception. So I
Yes,
think
I know
for
that.
like for all the words involved in there, transcendental synthetic unity of apperception, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, it's not that bad. It's just like I didn't want to bring that in as if we're going to be talking about that and then like not go back to it.
Well, anyway,
Well,
yeah.
that exists if you're curious. We'll get more into it, but don't worry about it now. All you need to know is the simple perception, just self-awareness that gives us unity, which honestly is a pretty big idea in what we just said. And there's too much. There's only a few more aspects, but we'll get to that later when we get to that. But yeah,
Right.
so more generally in this section, he's just breaking down what he thinks is a three-step process in terms of synthesizing the manifold a priori.
Right.
Right. So synthesizing an experience, three-step process. We don't really know what imagination is. Hopefully, he says it later. Cool. Oh yes. And then in addition to their empirical use, all these faculties have a transcendental one. So it's not like we're just empirically taking in like senses and doing this process. We are transcendentally doing that in a
We
more like metaphysical manner as well, according to
we
Kant.
dry Kant reader moment. We
Huh?
don't really know what imagination is.
Yeah. I'm just keeping it 100. I don't. I'm not gonna
No,
pretend.
but like because we don't know what imagination, like imagine in the normal sense, we don't know what imagination is.
Oh, yeah. It's like, bro, imagine. I cannot. I don't know what that is.
What is this imagination?
It's like Ray. Yeah. Like, imagine? Huh? What do you mean? I just get in the robot.
Ray's got quite the imagination, though.
Yeah.
Although
Um,
she probably doesn't know what it is still.
yeah. Fox doesn't know what sex is. Goku mode.
That's Ray.
Yeah.
That's
Imagines
canonically
doesn't know what
Goku.
imagination is.
No, that's canonically Goku, though.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Anyway,
Yes, diverting off of our anime tangent and going back to this book here, this critique of pure reason. We covered this paragraph, right? And pretty much
yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll continue then. The famous Locke, John Locke. If you guys don't know who that is, he's a empiricist philosopher we've talked about kind of extensively. So check out the other ones if you want more about him. Uh,
And a political philosopher.
Yes, which we haven't really talked as much about here, but even a little bit of that too. So, the famous Locke, John Locke, from neglect of this consideration, and because he encountered pure concepts of the understanding and experience, also derived them from this experience, and thus proceeded so inconsistently that he thereby dared to make attempts at cognitions that go far beyond the boundary of all experience. So he's saying Locke basically fucked up this thing where Kant's like, we have an empirical use and they have a transcendental use. Locke was like, I don't know what transcendental is. I'm just going to stick to empirical use of this three-step process, which I don't know if it's this exact three-step process in Locke, but whatever process is happening in Locke, it's only empirical, not transcendental. And Kant's like, no, you need to have the empirical one as well, right? Concepts three a priori. Don't do that, Locke. That's you're going to mess things up. And he says that he calls that inconsistently because he's not being consistent with the transcendental and the empirical. He's only doing empirical. So, and we get David Hume name drop. So he's basically, this is a big empiricist critique, this paragraph right here. David Hume recognized that in order to be able to do the latter, it is necessary that these concepts would have their origin a priori. So that's a little closer. But since he could not explain at all how it is possible for the understanding to think of concepts that in themselves are not combined in the understanding, it's still necessarily combined in the object, and it never occurred to him that perhaps the understanding itself, by means of these concepts, could be the originator of experience in which its objects are encountered. He thus, driven by necessity, derived them from experience, namely from a subjective necessity arisen from frequent association experience, which is subsequently falsely held to be objective, i.e., custom. We'll get more of that later, but to break this down a little bit, I'm pretty sure this is like 2 sentences or something. This is bad writing, but he's basically saying that, okay, Hume was a little better than Locke, right, in recognizing that, okay, yes, there are some a priori concepts, but David Hume is like, where the hell do they come from? He didn't have what Kant has in terms of like his philosophical toolkit, and he was like, okay, all we really have is experience to go off of, right? That's kind of Hume's criterion of truth. He's like, if it's not already in itself certain, or I don't know if certain is a good word, but if it's not already itself like obviously true, like abstractly, or if it's not an empirical matter of fact, then commit it to the flames, because it's not knowledge. It's worthless. So that's kind of his 2 things, and because he's working within that framework, the best he can do in terms of finding an explanation for his a priori concepts is a subjective association and experience. Associations of ideas. This is a big concept in Hume, right? It's like, how do you so maybe this is also like, right, looking into the power of imagination. Hume defines imagination better than Kant has in this point already. He's like, right, you can imagine anything, like a gold mountain, and that's because we associate ideas we find empirically.
I think slight correction.
Okay.
I mean, it might not be correct in my correction, but I'm going to try it anyway.
Sure.
He says David Hume recognized that in order to be able to do the latter meaning make attempts to go beyond the boundaries of all experience, it is necessary that these concepts would have to have their origin a priori. So, in order to go beyond experience, they would have to be a priori.
Yes.
But since he cannot explain how it is possible for the understanding to think of concepts that are not combined in the understanding, still necessary, blah, 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 blah. So I don't think he's saying that David Hume thought of these concepts as a priori, right? He says that we get them from frequent association and experience. So not a priori, empirically. But because we get them empirically, they can't perform any kind of transcendental, like they don't tell us anything about experience. Like, they don't tell us anything beyond experience. So Hume's not saying, according to Kant, that, for instance, cause and effect, other concepts are a priori, but that they would need to be a priori if they were to go beyond experience. And so Hume's therefore saying you can't go beyond experience.
The latter.
So it's more nuanced.
Yeah, I'm just trying
Hume
to
doesn't
I'm trying to pick up on
any-
like what he means here by like, in order to do the latter. What is the latter?
The latter is
also derived from experience.
No, he thereby dared to make attempts at cognitions that go far beyond the boundary of all experience.
That's the latter. Okay.
Yeah, that's the latter.
Okay. Oh, okay. So.
Hume saying in order.
Oh, okay. And then Hume recognized that, okay, well, if we want to do that, we have to have things that go. In order to go beyond experience, we have to have concepts that go beyond experience, right? Because that's a priori.
Concepts that are a priori, yes, not empirical.
Yes.
That go beyond experience.
Okay. But he couldn't explain how that's possible, or how to do that, because his framework is in either empirical ideas or any a priori. He had a conception of it, like with math, I'm pretty sure at least. But that's kind of like it. He kind of viewed reason as kind of just a associator of, so like the function of reason is to associate things from experience.
Yes.
So that's like the closest we get to any a priori functions. Um, so yeah, there's not much you can do with that. It's kind of like a much weaker Kantian system in my, at least how it was explained to me. And when I was reading Hume, I was like, okay, because Kant is kind of similar, right? Like we do use concepts to like, it's more than just association. It's like direct ties. So
Yeah, to me, it's weird that Kant is speaking in this way because for Kant, it's not like you ultimately get to a place where you can use these a priori concepts to transcend experience.
right, that's why I'm trying to say, like, I think that the human and Kant are more similar than like people realize, because Kant isn't as like as radical, like you're saying.
Well, yeah, the main difference between Hume and Kant is that he admits these a priori concepts,
Mhm.
like cause and effect, and so he thinks that there is like he doesn't have the exact same problem of induction.
Yeah,
Um, we've discussed this earlier. I don't think he solves. I think he solves only half of the problem of induction,
yeah.
which is how do we get this idea of causation? But then how do we actually apply this idea of causation? That's that's he. I don't think he solves it at all. Like he shows that in theory, yes, we need the concept of cause and effect, and the
Yes.
concept of cause and effect applies objectively. But he doesn't show how, in any case, we could actually prove cause and effect.
As like a universal like
No, not as a universal in any particular case. So, for instance, if
right,
I
which is a universal, right? Because if you want to apply it to any case, you need to be able to do it
right,
universally. Which is what I meant. Yeah, sorry.
oh, I see what you mean. Like, uh, I'm just like it's clear on Kant how we could get the idea of natural laws of
Yes, which
nature.
I find that's the biggest difference though, is because that is kind of association, but it's a much stronger like necessary association where Hume just kind of makes it like a like, oh, this is kind of how our minds work, like, and Kant's like, no, this is like necessarily how experience must work because of these categories. And which is kind of, I
But it's
think, to bring it back to like this, I think that's kind of like what Kant is saying. He's like, yeah, Hume got close, but his framework didn't allow him to do anything besides, like, the best he could come up with is freaking association and experience. And I'm telling you, like, no, yeah, these concepts are stronger than mere association. They're literally like pillars of construction, or I don't know if that's a good phrase, but
right, sure. But I think the thing that Kant doesn't really solve is how you can actually figure out what causes what.
yeah, he kind of just says it happens.
But like however many times I drop a rock, how do I know that the next one isn't gonna like go up?
Yeah, he doesn't really solve the bill like in Hume's language. It would be like the billiard ball problem.
Right. So
Like,
he doesn't solve
yeah,
half of Hume. Like he solves half of Hume's problem and leaves the other half unsolved,
yeah,
in my opinion.
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll see more of that in the future. But that is a good point. Cool. So yes, thank you for pointing out that nuance. I do think that's important to say. So yeah, we've covered that much, and this goes on past the semicolon. By the way, we haven't even finished the sentence technically, grammatically speaking. So I'll continue it. However, he subsequently proceeded quite consistently in declaring it to be impossible to go beyond the boundary of experience with these concepts and the principles that they occasion. Right, so we just were talking about that. Hume, because of his framework, is like, no, we can't do it. Kant's telling you, yes, we can. So that's their big difference. Although Hume was still closer than Locke, because at least Hume admitted that, yes, even though I don't think we can have these theoretically in order to do this, I recognize that they would need to be a priori. Whereas Locke was totally just everything was empirical, according to Kant anyway. I don't remember like enough Locke to tell you whether that's accurate or not, but
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. No, that is consistent for Locke. I don't know what section of Hume he would be referring to that where Hume says we would need them to be a priori in order to
yeah,
do
I
it.
don't remember him saying that either. To be honest, I'm kind of just taking his word for it. Like, I don't remember
I'm
Hume
not.
saying anything even like this at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure that he doesn't, but I don't remember that in Hume.
Yeah. So sus, but sure.
I mean, Kant's kind of renowned for getting everybody wrong,
Yeah. Although
or at
that's a
least
pretty that's more than just a misinterpretation. He's literally saying Hume basically said this, where it's less of an interpretive thing, more of just like
well,
a
yeah,
quote.
but that's everything. Like the only person I think he doesn't misinterpret is Locke, because Locke is so easy.
I mean, yeah.
It's really hard to misinterpret Locke. Um, but like he definitely misinterprets Spinoza, and I think he misinterprets Hume, and he definitely misinterprets Berkeley.
Yes, yes. We'll see
Hume.
that. We'll see that later. Which is also on why I'm glad we're kind of sticking to B editions, because the whole like quote unquote refutation of idealism that comes later. Um,
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
yeah, that's a B edition exclusive. So we'll have a nice little cringe compilation edition when we get there. So yeah, fun times. But moving on, the empirical derivation, however, to which both of them are resorted, cannot be reconciled with the reality of the scientific cognition a priori that we possess, that, that namely of pure mathematics and general natural science, and is therefore refuted by the fact. Hang on, I just need to read that again for my own sake. Empirical derivation to which both of them resorted cannot be reconciled with the reality. Is he just saying that they can't be empirical because of how cognition works, which is has an a priori component to it? So you can't derive it purely from empirical.
Oh, hold on. Read it again.
Okay. The empirical derivation, however, to which both of them resorted, both of them being human Locke, resorted, cannot be reconciled with the reality of the scientific cognition a priori that we possess. That namely, pure mathematics and general natural science, and is therefore refuted by the fact. Um,
Okay, so first of all, the general natural science thing, we've discussed this
I
earlier.
was gonna say this seems like a callback to very questionable.
His general natural science that is a priori valid and necessary for all time and is also wrong.
Yes,
Demonstrably wrong.
I was gonna say let's just strike this out and focus on the mathematics because
Focus on the mathematics.
yeah, if you want to see why this is
Wrong.
wrong, go back earlier. It's somewhere in the introduction to the aesthetic. You'll see it. It comes up general natural science. If you're in this point in the study, you've probably seen that already. Yeah, let's
You
just
got me so
let's
hard
strike
on
that
that
out.
one, but it's just wrong.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, pure
But your
mathematics.
mathematics, right? Okay, so that makes sense for Locke, right? That's Leibniz's critique in New Essays of Human Understanding, right? Where he directly addresses Locke. He's like, okay, how pure mathematics then, right?
Mm,
And of course, Locke has some kind of idea, but it ultimately does not hold up. Um,
yes, like most things in law. Anyway, at least in the metaphysics, that I'm not going to speak to the politics, but anyway.
I think, yeah. So for Locke, right? There are no innate ideas, period.
Hmm.
So everything that exists is empirically conditioned, and so we get this empirical idea of mathematics. But according to Kant, um, mathematics is scientific. Remember, this is the old sense of scientific,
Yes, not
meaning,
natural science.
but apodictically certain,
Hmm.
meaning like it has to be true. So Kant, I think, is saying basically we couldn't know the universality or the necessity of pure mathematics from any kind of empirical experience. And therefore, Locke's derivation of mathematics from empirical experience is it doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with scientific cognition.
Yes. Good. Okay,
Um,
that's what I thought. That it has that a priori
I'm
component
not
that
sure that that really holds up for Hume, because Hume, while he's considered an empiricist, is
is much
most
more
renowned.
sympathetic to a priori.
Right, he's more renowned for his fork. He says either it's a relation of ideas or it's a matter of fact.
Yes, and
Uh,
relation of ideas a priori is still something there. It just doesn't. It's not as powerful as Kant's.
I'm just not sure whether he speaks too much on it, one way or the other. I think he just says relations of ideas are
Well, that's
relations of
just when he's known for his fork, but he has
ideas.
other writings in which he speaks, if I remember correctly, which is like an asterisk. I haven't read Hume in a while, but I almost positive I remember he speaks on the a priori nature of mathematics. So,
So he's right about Locke, I think. He may or may not be right about Hume here.
yeah, that's a questionable thing. But in terms of like for the sake of conceptual understanding, he's basically just saying empirical derivations of everything doesn't make sense because they're inherently a priori aspects of our scientific cognition. He calls it.
Yeah. But
Well, yeah,
not
we
general.
have scientific cognition, which by the old definition, right, apodictically true.
Wrong.
So,
It's wrong.
wrong in general
It's
natural science. Yeah,
just
yeah.
for a
Get
review
that
of
shit
why
out of
it's
here.
wrong, he has this idea that general natural science, right, includes propositions
Like
like
physics.
the conservation of matter. He thinks we can know that a priori, even though we didn't know that for most of history. And then Newton comes along with a bunch of empirical natural philosophy, right, based on empirical studies, and then says that this is a law. And then Kant comes along and says, ah, yes, and we could have done this without using any experimental data or any empirical stuff. It could have been known just a priori. And then later, future empirical stuff,
Proves it
namely
wrong. Yeah.
Einstein's law of, relativity, E equals mc squared, proves that wrong.
So womp womp, general natural science. I was
Pretty
I was really like intent on like trying to like I mean not that example but like this seems really interesting to me and like I kind of want it to be true because it's kind of cool. Like I really like that concept of like we can like just fucking derive like a priori rules about nature. That seems like really like based wizard like arcane shit. Like I really want this to be true, but Patrick and I argued and like thought about it really hard and we really just can't come up with a good like defense for this, unfortunately. So as much as I would like to be an awesome like natural wizard, it's not happening.
No. That's
So
what people think Hegel does, but that's not what Hegel
no,
does.
that isn't what Hegel does at all. People, that's a bastardization of Hegel by Hegel haters. Um, yeah,
Well, I mean, to be fair, it's what he sounds like he's doing until you consider the fact that necessity only works in reverse for Hegel.
yes, only in retrospect.
Hindsight is always 2020. Yes.
Yes, yep. So yeah, make sure you read Hegel carefully, kids, and don't try to be a nature wizard, kids. Um,
Don't try to derive
derive
don't try
natural laws sitting in your like basement thinking really hard.
I
For
mean, you
example,
can if you have some experimental data to back it up, because that's actually what Einstein did. He didn't go out and do experiments.
no,
He
but
got
other people did, and he used
yes, but
that.
other people did, and he used that.
Yeah, don't try to like in isolation, like how mathematicians prove like the pure mathematics. Don't try to do that with the world. Um,
Yeah, it doesn't work.
as cool as it sounds, and as cool as it would be, God, like please update reality so I can do this. But until that happens, don't do this. Yeah,
He tried, it didn't work.
yeah. Maybe I will like use my German idealism to like posit a new faculty or something using dialectics, but no, not happening. At least right now. Um, so those are the important lessons we can get out of that. Get out of that paragraph. Um, uh,
Fuck you, unposits your eye.
that's also a grave. With great dialectical power comes great dialectical responsibility. uh,
All right, let's get back to the faculty attendant.
yeah. Okay. Do you want to read this? I read this paragraph, right? Do you want to read the next one?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The first of these two famous men opened the gates wide to enthusiasm, since reason, once it has authority on its side, will not be kept within limits by indeterminate recommendations of moderation.
What the
The
fuck?
second gave
What
way
is he saying?
entirely to skepticism, since he believed himself to have discovered what is generally held to be reason a deception of our faculty of cognition. We are now about to make an attempt to see whether we cannot successfully steer human reason between these two cliffs, assign its determinate boundaries, and keep open the entire field of its purposive activity.
What the fuck is he saying about Locke opening up the enthusiasm? I don't understand what that means. I entirely get this part, but I don't understand the enthusiasm.
Locke actually was an atomist.
Oh,
And yes, Locke was an atomist. And he thought that you could basically use empirical stuff to determine, like, to do atomism. And
so that's the enthusiastic part. Like,
yeah, and this is an unpopular opinion, but philosophical atomism, properly speaking, is not a scientific claim. It is a metaphysical one.
yes,
and
that's controversial.
Yes.
Oh.
Most people associate atomism with, like, atomism is true because we have atoms, but they're not really atoms. They're just called atoms.
Yeah, like.
Okay, so I'm going to back up and explain what the hell I'm talking about.
I mean, I know what you're talking about, but yeah, maybe for the sake of the.
But yes. So atomism, right? Atom, like atom, yes, like atoms, right? Is the belief that all matter is composed of tiny, tiny corpuscles, little things, right? And it has a very long history. It goes all the way back to ancient Greece. There was a theory. Democritus starts it, and then the empiricists adopt it, that everything is made up of tiny little bodies that are so small that you can't see them. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we actually discover that there are, in fact, tiny little bodies that make up basically all matter, and we called them atoms. But the reason that those atoms are not atoms is because atom means impossible to split. And we have split the atom. Like, it is further divisible. So atomism is the belief that there are indivisible tiny particles that make up everything. And we have not discovered, and in fact, it is impossible to discover whether or not something is indivisible. This is my controversial take, although I don't know why it's controversial. In my view, it's impossible to determine whether or not something is indivisible because it's like, just because we haven't divided it yet does not mean that it is not divisible. You can't ever prove a negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So atomism is the claim that there are certain particles that if you get small enough just cannot be divided further. Okay? And Locke is a supporter of atomism. He believed that, like, empiricism could, like, demonstrate atomism. But atomism is a metaphysical claim, and so it cannot be demonstrated a posteriori. It would have to be demonstrated a priori.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Makes sense to me, but I'm also like a Kant reader, so maybe to non-Kant readers this distinction is not so clear. This would be my guess as to why it's controversial. But
yeah, why it's controversial? I think it's controversial because people think that you can
do general natural science.
No, people think that you can prove a negative for some reason. Like, they just forget that you cannot prove a negative. Yeah. Like, they don't think that you can. They just forget that you can't prove a negative. Like, there's a comic I was reading about Russell and Wittgenstein, and it was supposed to be super impressive that Wittgenstein refused to admit that there was not a rhinoceros in the room with him when he was talking with Russell. Like, Russell was like, "Is there a rhinoceros in the room?" And Wittgenstein's like, "I don't know." And I'm just thinking, yeah, duh, he doesn't know. There could be an invisible rhinoceros in the room. There could be a hidden rhinoceros in the room. You can't prove a negative. And similarly, you cannot prove that, like, it's impossible to divide anything. Therefore, atomism can't be proven empirically. But anyway, yeah, Locke was an atomist, so I think that's probably the enthusiasm he's talking about.
And I guess you're enthusiastic because, like, you have like this wizard-like grasp on reality.
Yeah, pretty much enthusiasm, like the idea that we can discover all these amazing things, like atomism.
Okay.
Although, of course, according to Locke, he wasn't an enthusiast at all.
Yeah, like, that's what I was confused about. Like, okay.
Well, yeah, because if you compare Locke to Leibniz or Descartes or Spinoza,
he's the most pessimistic out of all of them.
Like, by far.
Yeah.
So,
So
so
I was
he's
a
just
little
calling
confused there, but okay.
all rationalists enthusiasts and also Locke enthusiasts because he's occupying a middle position between Locke and Hume.
Yeah.
And like people call him a for some reason people think that Kant was more of a rationalist. I think he's much more of an
Of an
empiricist.
empiricist, yes. This has been my take as well since I like learned about Kant and like his. Although later on we'll see why that, like, especially with the while we're talking about for transcendental unity apperception, that's where a lot of the rationalist stuff comes in.
Yes, there is a rationalist component, but in terms of overall effect, he would consider all of the rationalists too enthusiast and Locke too enthusiast, and the only one he would consider too skeptical
Is Hume.
is Hume.
Yes, so he's definitely much more like on the spectrum. He's a lot more sympathetic to empiricists in terms of like epistemology, I guess. And
Yeah,
sure,
that's what I
so
think.
I agree with you. And on that note, yes, Hume is a skeptic. This is a lot simpler to understand, I think. Uh, Hume's like, we can't really know.
Anything.
Yeah, because it's all just associations of ideas that, like Kant said on this page, we can't prove a priori in the Hume's framework. So Hume's like, well, in my framework, which I believe to be reality, right? Because that's what he was proposing, a treatise on human knowledge. He's like, well, given the framework of our knowledge, we can't really fucking know if things are, you know, that necessary, or that, you know, we're kind of just associating out here and shit. So there's a this like kind of eternal disconnect between, or maybe eternals do. There's a fundamental disconnect between like how we like cognize things and how reality is, and we'll never close that gap. And that's kind of the bummer skepticism of Hume. You can read all about that like online and everywhere else if you want to get more detail on that's my brief explainer. I don't know if Patrick was adding anything to that, but if not, we can move on.
No, no. That Hume is skeptical is pretty straightforward.
Yes. Okay. Based. All right. I will close out the section, and we will. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we'll finish this paragraph, and then this footnote explains that there's a difference in the upcoming section between from the sections 15 to 27. There's a difference between the A and B edition. We're gonna go with the B edition. That's gonna be next time. I will end with this paragraph. This. Okay. Great. Here we go. I will merely precede this with the explanation of the categories. They are the concepts of an object in general, by means of which its intuition is regarded as determined with regard, God, that writing, to one of the logical functions for judgments. Thus, the function of the categorical judgment was that of the relationship of the subject to the predicate. For example, all bodies are divisible. Yet, in regard to the merely logical use of the understanding, it would remain undetermined which of these two concepts will be given the function of the subject and which will be given that of the predicate. For one can also say something is divisible by a body. Through the category of substance, however, if I bring the concept of a body under it, it is determined that its empirical intuition in experience must always be considered as a subject, never as a mere predicate, and likewise with all the other categories. Okay, so this is a bit more of a repeat, or he's basically explaining what the categories are. He's explaining that there's we make determinations with regard to logical functions, and we make categorical judgments, right? For example, all bodies are divisible, and there's a merely logical component to this, right? Where you could say just something is divisible by a body, or even more abstractly, maybe something is divisible by something or something else. Something could be divisible by itself. You could even say, but it's unknown really what is the subject and what is the predicate. But how do we determine that, and therefore how do we make it a categorical judgment? This idea of a substance, which for Kant it is determined by intuition, if I'm reading that correctly, and therefore through intuition we can kind of figure out which, not like in the traditional sense, like in the Kantian sense of like an intuition being given to us sense, we can figure out what is the subject and what is the predicate of the uh, determination or the judgment. Um, I think that makes sense, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. Do you have anything to add, Patrick?
Well, I'm not sure why something isn't already a substance, right?
That's a very
Concept of thing.
good Spinoza-esque question.
Well, I mean, we're saying thing, right? So is
Something.
thing not subject? Is thing
Uh,
not substance?
Compared to body, I guess it isn't. I think he's trying to make like a relative example rather than like a logical like.
Why?
Um, I guess because if there's no intuition tying it to it, then it becomes an empty concept, and you could say an empty concept is divisible by a body, and logically that like follows.
But would that also be a thing?
Um, Not and how Kant means a thing because it's tied to specifically intuition. It seems, unless it's
Hmm.
not, unless it's just any representation, because then it's and he's just saying empirical intuition because of the example that he gives, with that being a body. So,
Uh,
so maybe you're right here. Maybe I'm just not abstracting enough from this, and maybe yes, even like even a concept. Yes, no, because that makes sense. Because you obviously can make determinations that are made up of just concepts. No,
sure, yeah.
yes, you're
No.
right. So that's a good question. Yes, I think there should be some sort of substance to concepts. You're right, but he seems to.
Well, I'm just wondering, like he says, something is divisible by a body. That's too abstract. We need the idea of substance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But don't we already have the idea of substance when we say something?
Oh, okay. Um, well, I don't know because at first I thought substance specifically meant intuition, but
Well, substance, in my view, just means a thing. I guess in Kant it means a thing which persists, but that's already like in the concept of thinghood.
sure. Um, I thought it had something. It makes it sound like it makes it here like it specifically has to do with intuition and like therefore not concepts. But I think that's just because he's using the example of this body. So it would have been really helpful if he could have used like something that's like purely a concept. Um,
I don't.
but
Hmm.
but I don't, because then that would answer that question, I think, because then the concept would have substance to it. Does that make sense or no?
Um,
At least my like,
it doesn't quite make sense to me, to be honest.
huh?
The whole thing's confusing me, to be honest.
Yeah,
Let me
I've
see.
tried.
I'm going to read it again from the top. I
Okay.
will merely proceed with this explanation of the categories. They are concepts of an object in general, by means of which its intuition is regarded as determined with regard to one of the logical functions for judgments. Okay, that makes sense so far.
Mm-hmm.
A concept determines an intuition in regard to the logical judgments. Okay, so that's
Yes.
the difference between a category and a a judgment itself.
Yes.
So a category seems to be the logical judgments applied
To intuitions.
in intuition,
Yes.
meaning applied to an object and thereby objective. Okay,
Yep.
thus the function of the categorical judgment was that of the relationship of the subject to the predicate. Okay,
I
all
think this is where
bodies are
we're confused.
divisible. Yet, in regard to the merely logical use of the understanding, it would remain undetermined which of these two concepts will be given the function of subject and which given the that of predicate. I don't know what that sentence means.
He's in some way he's trying to distinguish like a categorical like judgment in which it's clear, right? The relationship between subject and predicate is clear. For example, all bodies are divisible. I think he's saying you can, if you abstract it and go to like a merely like logical thing where you like, well, as we'll see later on in this paragraph, right? Like where you abstract away from substance, which I think is where we were getting confused. It's like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you can abstract away from
Which
substance.
is why I thought it had to do with intuitions, because you can abstract away from intuitions.
Oh, well, I guess you can abstract away from substance in the Kantian sense. This is skipping ahead, but for Kant, substance is a kind of intuition or a kind of object.
Oh,
Namely,
so
that,
okay, so I was right. It does have to do with intuition. Okay.
well, yeah, it's a, well, it's a kind of object consisting of a composite of intuition and concept, namely
Oh,
something that persists in experience.
okay. So something about it is dependent on intuition, like necessarily. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So in regard to the something is divisible through the category of substance, I bring the concept of body under it. The determined intuition that is empirical intuition. Okay, I think I understand. So maybe not.
I think all
Uh,
he's saying is basically to have uh, a determination using the logical functions of judgment. You have to have substance because otherwise everything would just be purely like logical, and we wouldn't be able to like make heads or tails of it in terms of like coherent experience. It would just be like, I don't know, like X is X. Like it wouldn't be very determinate at all, right? It would just be like,
yes.
it would be maybe, I don't know, empty judgments
Yeah,
or something.
okay, that makes some sense.
Yeah, so I think he's saying we need to bring in substance to make it like, in this example, categorical, but like any of the 12 types or whatever, you need to have substance. I think that's the point of this. And it's kind of like a weird way of putting it. At least in terms of like understandability, it's weird, but think we
Or
got it. I hope anyway. I don't know. If he talks more about substance, then I think we'll understand it better.
well, I remember I scribbled in my copy of the Critique of Pure Reason. I just wrote wonky next to his discussion of substance.
Oh, okay.
So I don't remember in what way it is wonky, but
Well,
I
hopefully we find out soon. That would be cool. That would be helpful, I think. Yeah. Um, okay. So looks like we're ending this section and this session not as confident as usual, maybe, but that's okay. That happens in Kant, I think. I think we'll still be able to continue on okay, and maybe even the future things will inform us more about the ideas found in this paragraph. So, and knowing how Kant writes that, because we usually skip ahead to future references to understand what we're talking about anyway. It's just we've read a lot more of the future things, so it's just Patrick's experience with this specific future thing is wonky. So,
yeah, I've
may,
read the whole critique. I just
yeah,
still, it's a difficult book.
it is difficult. So maybe we'll get to that part. We'll unwonkify it, and we can understand this. That's my hope going forward. Yeah, good goal to have, I think. And the next time we'll be moving on to the B edition, which is the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, to cover sections 15 through 27. Um, because in the A edition, it's only divided into two sections, and this is divided into, what is that, 12 sections? So that seems to be helpful. So we'll do that next time. Hopefully tomorrow. in real time. I'll get to uploading these eventually. So, yeah, thanks for joining us for Kant study. Another wonderful edition. Patrick, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I like the phrase de-wonkification. I
Ah,
guess
I'm so glad. It's fun, yeah. So let's continue to dewonkify. We hope you'll join us for dewonkification of this whole book as we continue on, specifically where we are now in the. Well, we're about to get to the deduction, so that well, let's look forward to that. That seems fun. I'm a deduction fan.
and until next time, keep attending to those faculties.
Yeah, make sure you're passing your apperception checks. And don't practice general natural science. That's an important takeaway. Pure mathematics is based though. Maybe do some pure mathematics in your free time. That might be fun.
Yeah,
And epistemologically valid. Cool. Alrighty. Well, we'll see you next time for some deduction. Bye.
see ya.